Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And to kind of kickstart this, I want to introduce you to our spectacular female disruptors, as I like to call them, which is awesome. So to start off, we have Jen Harper, who is the founder of Cheekbone Beauty. She's also a Women of the Year in 2019 by Chanelaine magazine. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
It's nice to put a face to you because we were spoken on the phone every time. We have Katie Davey as well, who is the founder of FemWonk, also policy lead for Public Policy Forum. Hi, Katie.
Hey, everyone.
We have Manjit Basi. I can go on for like hours. Manjit Basi, to keep it short. She's a coach, a learning facilitator. She's also a shift disruptor as well. Amazing. I'm sure a lot of you know Manjit from passing on. We have Poojas, who is Director of Marketing and Customer Service for Driftscape. She's also an advisor on Startup Chats. And last but not least, just keep going. She's also named as 20 Amazing Women in Tech in Canada by Canada Alliance. Hi, Pooja.
Hi.
Hi. And last but not least, we have Lindsay Thompson. Lindsay's been with me since the beginning of the series, which is awesome. She is a registered psychotherapist and also the founder of Momentum Mindset. Wow.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hello. Sorry, I'm still continuing to let everyone into this conversation. Where to start? I feel as though this topic probably seems to be the best timing now, not only because we're in isolation, but we're moving more so into the weekend. So it's a chance for us to put things into action, hopefully to carve out some time for ourselves. And often we do get caught up in the rhythm of our lives, and we do forget to ask ourselves probably one of the most important questions is, how happy are we? And are we fulfilled, and up to what extent? And why are we doing what we're doing? What is the reason behind it, right? And during this period of quarantine, some of us, more so than others, are forced to spend a little bit more time with ourselves. So, I mean, who knows? I think this is probably the best time to start asking ourselves these questions and becoming more aware of ourselves and to get to know ourselves even better than we used to before. So, where to start? I want to actually throw this question to all of you speakers here. I want to kind of better understand what your perception of self-mastery is and what it means to you as well. So Jen, I would like to kind of hear from you to kind of kickstart this.
Sure. So I will preface this by saying I have not mastered anything and don't think I ever will in this lifetime. But I was always obsessed with trying to figure out ways to make myself better, a better person, because there's a lot of like real raw stuff that I didn't like about myself for a long, long time. And in starting to research and study what that really meant, I looked at the whole concept of self-awareness. And this was like a real awakening when I discovered that like 10% of people are actually self-aware, but that other 90% thinks they are. So that poses a big challenge, because then we could think we're self-aware, but then we're, according to the study, we're really, really not. So that meant like really deeply diving in. And I do that regularly. I'm really open about sharing my story about sobriety. And I didn't build this brand until I got sober, which was in 2014. And then that has just been this massive journey of healing ever since then. And it's been a big process. So every single day is like this constant check-in of who I am and why did I feel that way about that conversation. And there's things still I don't love about my personality that come out, and it's certain individuals can bring that out sometimes. So and then it's getting real with why not that accepting all personalities and just loving people for who they are and in the space that they're in that moment. So it's a ton of work. It's a massive amount of work. It has to happen every day. It's not something that you can like read one book and think you're healed and well, but it's a journey. It's a process, much like this is, 43, finally figured this out. Life is a journey, and there's no like end, like, oh, I'm happy now because I did this. It's going to go on until we all end it.
That's actually real. I feel like that's defining my life right now. You're just constantly refining who you are as an individual. Thanks for sharing, Jen. Pooja?
I love what you said, Jen. It's really true that, this art of self-mastery is like an everyday needed kind of process in each individual's life, right? It's not just limited to us as females, but everyone, even kids, need to be taught this process. And mainly because, to me, it's our ability to visualize what we want for ourselves in our personal as well as our career lives, for now as well as for the future. And it kind of then decides our ability to harness our will as well as make the most of our capabilities while being aware of our limitations to achieve this visual that we've created about ourselves, right? About what we want to be and who we see ourselves as, or what we want for our family and things like that, right? So I completely agree. It's an everyday, if not an every moment art of our life.
Thank you. Manji?
Yeah, well, it's a big topic that you've chosen to cover, Sonia. So it's like, woo, we got an hour, 90 minutes to cover it. Yeah, so I certainly agree with everything that Pooja and Jen have said. And I guess, so what I would add to that, I suppose, is, I don't know if it's add or expand on it, would be that, yeah, it's a lifelong journey. So to me, self-mastery is not actually a goal. It's actually goalless, if that makes any sense, right? Because it is more an intentionality. So it's the intention of how you want to live your life. So that, picking up on some other things said, that usually requires radical self-inquiry, which leads to radical self-awareness, right? And you might think that it's okay to do it once in a while, but it actually isn't, because we are such different people at different stages of our life. The one thing that probably I would say is that what doesn't change is that I think all have some real deep core values at our heart. And we seem to be most of the time out of touch with them. So I think self-mastery is this lifelong journey of actually getting to know ourselves better and better and better, right? And really, when you get to know yourself that well and accept yourself completely, we're probably like the Buddha at enlightenment. And I don't think many of us will ever reach that in our lifetime, right? So I think it is this concept of and if I take it back, like, about mastery, I mean, if you think about what mastery is about doing really difficult shit at first, right? So you're doing some really difficult stuff and it feels really kitschy, it feels uncomfortable, you're gonna fail a lot, but it progressively gets easier, right? So therefore, self-mastery is to have and start to begin to have those sometimes very dark conversations with ourselves that are needed to understand what's not right. What are my other ways of knowing that are telling me perhaps that it's not okay? Because we rely way too much in our head in our lives. Society's taught us that. We forget to go that the fact that the neural system actually sits across our body. So what's our intuition? What's our heart telling us? Right? So anyways, so self-mastery is learning to understand all the signals and actually being able to respond to them in some way. And I think the more we practice it, the better we get at it, right? I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, no, that was really interesting, that the point you brought up is kind of looking at the core values. So for myself personally, I come from an immigrant family and then we moved to Canada. So I didn't know what my values were. There was these learned values that I learned through myself, through self-discovery. And then there's something that I thought who I was supposed to be. And then there's something who I was exposed to. Maybe this is how it's supposed to. So it's a very difficult, you're absolutely right in that, to have that conversation within yourselves, but it's really hard to stick to those conversations, to make progress in who you're wanting to be and who you think you should be and where you want to go. So that was
I'll just add something very quick, is that,
yeah.
what you've sparked in me is the fact that there's something about internal motivators and internal values versus external. And our society's taught us to value external motivators more than what our internal motivators and heart motivators are.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Lindsay?
Yeah, so I'm going to just set the stage to give everyone a little bit of context as to the perspective that I'm coming from. So in my work, this topic is very near and dear to my heart because I specialize in cognitive behavior therapy. So I want to come at this conversation from a little bit of a different standpoint, maybe go against the grain in terms of what's been said so far. So when I think of self-mastery, you know, I was doing some prep for this session and I was trying to think, okay, let's just do some stream of consciousness. Like, what are the words that come to mind for me first? And in my cognitive therapy mindset, my top words were discipline, growth, and commitment, right? And so for me, self-mastery is going beyond that level of awareness, having that understanding of what our values are, but then not just thinking about it, actually taking action on that. So for me, yes, it's absolutely about intentions, but it's about how am I going to bring that to life? So for example, an area that I've been working on in terms of self-mastery over the course of my life is just professional development and career development, right? So it's breaking down what are those goals that I have for the certain chapters of my life, you know, like in recognizing that learning and growth is a lifelong journey. So having those stages of what I want to accomplish and then working backwards and breaking that down to what does that mean that I'm going to be doing today, right? And so with that, we've been talking about this idea of knowing our values, but it's how do we make sure that we are this best version of ourselves for, you know, however we set up our own scale through like, okay, you know, I really value time with family. Okay, well, how do I live that out? Am I making time to have the awkward Zoom calls or checking on the relative that, you know, we maybe don't get along so well, but it's still important to talk to them because they're getting older or whatever it might be, right? So it's like, how do we, and I'm making light of that to just throw in some humor, but it's like, how do we actually take the steps to live that out, right? And so for me, it's about putting those ideas into action through different goals and steps, which we'll be getting more into.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Lindsay. I think that's absolutely, or if not, is equally important, is yes, it's great to kind of have these conversations within ourselves, but you're absolutely right. And what steps are we taking in order to help action those things out? So yeah, great point. Thanks for bringing that up. Katie.
Yeah, thanks so much. I agree again with much of what has already been said. That's perhaps the downside of going last. But I want to kind of bring up a point that really resonates with me. And, you know, as somebody who's in kind of the first decade of my career, and I won't even use the word career, I, you know, have been thinking a lot about what my journey has been over the last, again, decade. And for me, what has been really interesting and important is kind of unlearning what career means and what, you know, financially supporting yourself means. For me, I'm incredibly purpose and passion driven. My kind of reason for being is reducing inequality, and, you know, I can do that in many ways. As a policy person as well, it's not a linear path. And so I've had to do a lot of work to understand internally what my values are. And Majit, the very top line on my notes here were know your values. So I have had to do a lot of work to learn and understand my values, square kind of how I can live those values in every element of my life. And if, you know, there's some ways that I can improve, you know, or balance out, I guess, some of what the activities I'm doing to improve how those values are living out within my, I guess, external life, then kind of figuring out what that looks like. But the other thing kind of within that whole landscape that's been really interesting and important for me is realizing that it's okay to change your mind, realizing it's okay to always be learning, and when you have new information, acting on that new information and deciding again what makes sense for you at this moment in time, and recognizing that it's also just as important to know what you don't like and what you don't want to be spending your time doing. So I won't add too much. I'm excited for the conversation that follows.
No, that's absolutely wonderful. Kind of thinking about, yes, it's great to think about what we like, but it's equally as important to think about what we no longer are passionate about to kind of set our course. So with my background, I've always been in this education and skills development and training realm. And I remember I've always read about kind of the soft skills and the hard skills, and depending on the realm that you want to be in. But self-awareness and never really was a topic that came into any of those type of readings or any of my conversations that I've had with my peers. So I guess, why is it an essential skill to have, or to have it be part of who we are in our daily lives? Why is it a good skill, or a critical or an essential skill to have? Sorry, maybe I don't know. Well,
I can
sorry,
go. I can go
sure.
first over here, and the reason why I'll go first is because I think Katie said the most important point over here. It's our ability and our chance to unlearn things that don't matter anymore, right? Because from the time we're kids, we are learning these things, or we are taught certain things, like what you said, right? As an immigrant, you came with certain sets of certain mindset, and then our surroundings need us to adapt, which means that you need to unlearn a lot of things that are very evidently not needed anymore, right? Because you're using up so much of your energy in either storing or, debating or battling with these things that you've learned that no longer matter, which you could otherwise use, again, where you need self-mastery, is to learn new things, or learn where your strengths lie, so that you can target your energy or focus in a direction that you actually now at this stage see yourself, what you want to be, or what makes you more happy as such, right? And again, to what Katie said, and a very relevant point, right? You need to be aware of your limitations. You need to be aware of them for two simple reasons. Either one, face them. Yep, this is my limitation, but I don't want it to be my limitation, which means I need to keep learning to figure out how I can overcome this limitation, or very simply be okay with that limitation. It's fine. Each one of us has some sort of limitations. I mean, like, funnily enough, I hate public speaking. Like, for the job I am in, the career I've chosen, and everything I am always client facing, and I'm always out there. But I hate that. It makes me really nervous, right? But to me, that's something that I need as part of my life. So it's a limitation I need to overcome. So I need to constantly learn this. But I know my strengths are that the moment I set into it, I'm comfortable. I get to know the people, and then I'm good at it. And I need to then make the most of that strength of mine to kind of balance the scales, right? And that makes self-mastery a very essential skill, because without that, that ability or that focus on our need to master ourselves, you won't be aware of all these three elements, right? And without them, progressing can be a challenge, but otherwise would be easier.
Thanks, Pooja.
Yeah, I'll add to the conversation by saying I think that it sort of is a realm of everything we've talked about so far, right? Like, it's about self-awareness, and as Lindsay, right? Sorry, isn't that horrible that I almost forgot your name? Lindsay said, it's about acting, because sometimes we often hear about things like, well, knowing is half the battle. And it's like, well, no, knowing isn't half the battle. It's much less, because when you know something, like, we might know that self-mastery is important, but until we actually put baby steps into play to actually get to where we want, that means you're not practicing it. That means you're not experiencing an effort to create change in your life, right? And until we actually experience the uncomfort, right? I don't think that we get to self-mastery or growth, because, and I could tell you stats on this, but I won't, we don't have the time, but our body is geared towards homeostasis. That's why change is so hard, right? If you think about the thermostat, like, hey, I feel really good in this width, in bandwidth of my life, right? And so I know self-mastery is good, but this feels so good, right? So what happens is it just brings us back, and it just brings us back. So many of us are wondering, like, oh, I know I want that, but why am I not getting it? It's because, and again, that's probably a longer, deeper conversation. There's a lot of traps in our own body, in our mind, that bring us back to this homeostasis, right? Because we adapt and we habituate patterns in our life. So if you are actually trying to undo patterns in your life that you have lived for 20 years, 25 years, 54 years for me, right? Which I'm still trying to undo some things, then the reality is that it's going to be a lot of hard work. And I guess where I would go, that why I mentioned about intentionality earlier was that if we aren't very intentional, let's say, and we don't know what our values are, it is very easy to get distracted, right? We live in a world that gets us distracted. So I think that concept of you know, if you really want to practice getting towards something that is so corely important to you, then it really becomes about prioritizing what you value, because otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time. Because let's think about it. We think a lot these days about, well, I don't have enough time to do this. But the funny thing is, to me, it's not time management, it's actually commitment management. Because what happens is, if you're actually committing to the appropriate things that you really value, then you're actually, you're going to find it gets easier, but then you're going to get into the flow. And when you get into the flow, you just feel better when you know it's just right.
Yeah, and on that note of feeling better and adding to that, mastery it's really key to our overall mental health. So when I'm working with individuals with depression, the two things that we focus on to start off with in terms of making changes in their lives is finding ways and integrating different things that they can do to get a sense of either pleasure or productivity, which is under the guise of mastery, right? It's finding things that give us that sense of enjoyment and fulfillment. And happy byproducts of that are, you know, increased self-confidence, increased ability, increased perception, like of our ability to cope, right? We start to trust ourselves more. We start to believe in ourselves, which are natural buffers against low mood, anxiety, is like the two biggest things that a lot of us are experiencing right now. Those are one of the two core factors for me that relates to overall life satisfaction. Yeah.
On the same note, when you think of the word self-mastery, it sounds so selfish, but in turn, when you begin to master something, all of the relationships in your life are better for it. So you're a better mother, you're a better wife, you're a better sister, what have you. So that whole concept is so important for your overall life happiness, because without relationships, what are we, right? There's nothing there.
It's really interesting you brought up that point as well, Jen, in terms of, yes, it's good for us, but also importantly, it's good for the people that we surround ourselves with. And kind of shifting gears a little bit, I guess, essentially now what the world is going, we do put, I feel like, I'll speak for myself, I do put a lot of pressure, probably, even on ourselves to be an expert at so many different things, whether it's because we're passionate about it or whether it's because we think we need to be experts at something, even though we may not necessarily need to be. Or, you know, we're jumping from one position to another, or we're doing so many things and we're just constantly living on the go, without, as Manjeet put it, committing to reflecting and doing some refining of who we are, and to ensure that we're putting our best selves forward. So I guess to kind of present this to Katie and Pooja and Jen, I wanted to kind of ask you, what experiences have you faced that led you to incorporate this as part of your routine or part of your life or your everyday life? So Katie, I would love to kind of hear from you to start this off.
Sure. So, you know, Majit, you mentioned homeostasis. What I think about, though, as well is inertia. And, you know, you start doing something and you just keep going and you keep going and you keep going. And it doesn't necessarily always occur to you to self-reflect, or maybe it does. Maybe you realize you're not kind of doing what you want to be doing. But that halting the inertia is really difficult. You know, whether that is making a job change or perhaps evaluating how you're spending your time, or again, like making some larger decisions around relationships, location, all of that stuff. And that really occurred to me and happened to me in a big way about almost 2 years ago now. I had kind of just continued to fall into these really phenomenal opportunities, which I was incredibly grateful for. but I didn't take the time to actually ask myself if it was what I wanted to be doing or what I wanted to be spending my time on. And you know, that did bring up some definite issues of depression, anxiety, and everything, Lindsay, that you just mentioned. So that resonates a lot with me. And I was kind of pushed, honestly, to jump, and that was, you know, a great thing that happened for me. However, what I ended up doing was saying, okay, great. I was in a really good position financially, luckily, which I know is not something that would always be the case, but I had this real opportunity to try and do a whole bunch of other things and find out what I wanted to do. But instead of doing that intentionally, I just started running again, and I just started applying for a whole bunch of things, you know, fellowships, volunteer opportunities, conferences, speaking opportunities, traveling, which was all amazing, and I'm so grateful. But then I got on the other side of that and I didn't feel any further ahead. I didn't feel like I'd learned anything about myself. I know I learned a few skills, and you know, I learned a couple of things along the way, but I still had no idea what path I wanted to be on. So, you know, what that showed me was movement is good, but reflection is often better, or again, needs to be paired just as tightly towards movement. So what I was able to do is take advantage of some really phenomenal, again, opportunities that presented themselves. I engaged a career coach. I did, you know, all of the lovely personality tests and things like that. And again, really engaged with a professional to dig deep, understand what I needed, what I wanted, what my values were, my passions were. And that really set me up to be in a place where when I took my next step, I felt ready, a little bit scared, but ready, and you know, so much more, again, self-aware, so much more fulfilled. And I was just, you know, I'm still kind of living that though right now. I guess I'll say I'm still doing that work, you know, whether it's always learning and reading and, you know, engaging with folks in a more intentional way. But yeah, I think what I really learned was sometimes you just need to pull the emergency brake and reflect internally.
Thanks for sharing that, Katie. It definitely resonates a lot with me in terms of movement and reflection. I think it's just sometimes, for myself even, it was just natural for me to continue to move because that's what society has been has been laid out, is just need to get a job, need to do this, blah, blah, blah. But who has time for reflection, kind of a thing, right? So it's absolutely, you're bang on with that. Jen?
So I had already mentioned there, obviously, an addiction is a big way to self-discovery and self-mastery. But, you know, I mean, I guess when I look at the statistics, I'm one in, I think it's like less than 5% of people that actually recover from any form of addiction in terms of alcohol or drugs. So I always think that's really unfair. Why is the number so low? And it's because if you think of, when I thought of the concept of self-mastery, it takes an enormous amount to, when in describing addiction, I've told people that it was like, it's like a limb, an arm, or a leg that I had to give up, right? So that it's such a big portion and part of your life and your story that when you have to give that up and learn to live and create this new path. I read an amazing book in recovery called The Power of Habit by Dr. Charles Duhigg, which helped me really understand that the power did lie in my brain, that this addiction is all based on neurology, and that it was about recreating this pathway or literally rewiring my brain. And that's what I had to do. So then it took, again, that constant daily effort of mastering an addiction to do that. And so, I mean, that for me in my life experience now has been the greatest experience I've had in practicing that. But then, I mean, it's just daily life, relationships with colleagues, coworkers, family, wanting to be better for them helps you better yourself.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you.
Thanks.
Pooja?
I think my experience would be more quite similar on lines with what Katie just said. I mean, as you know already, Soumya, like my current stage in career is so busy. Like my daytime job is where I'm heading this marketing and customer success department at a company. I'm consulting with a few companies for their marketing needs. I'm mentoring newcomers on how to adapt to this culture, as well as get into, this how to hunt for a job or get into this corporate world. I'm helping nonprofits. I have my own travel blog. And at the same time, I'm running a business with my husband in the education sector. And now what that means is that both of us have to constantly be studying. So not only are you doing like this whole routine full of job, and then you're also having to study so that you can succeed in whatever you're doing, right? So a lot of it meant that I needed to put the right effort at the right time by anticipating what will be needed in the future versus reacting to it when I face it, right? And one of the best examples that comes to my mind is recently I was reflecting on this, that okay, my profession is in marketing and customer success, but I am in the tech sector, and being in Toronto, tech sector is mostly where you will get jobs, but I'm not someone who has a technical background. So I need to develop my skills there so that if I apply for another job or, as things change, I still look like a relevant individual or a candidate who can be selected. And as we all know, artificial intelligence is like the next big thing. It's what's going to take over the tech sector eventually. So, but how do I get to it? Because I'm not a coder. I don't know anything about that. But luckily at that point of time, this opportunity knocked on my door where I could do an AI course for management that didn't need you to code or anything like that. But I could add that skill set to my kitty as such, right? Where now I'm a marketer who has a technical background without being an engineer, as well as now if I'm doing something in the educational sector for my business, I have that credential to validate myself so someone else can trust me, as well as I can mentor students who I speak to or newcomers as I speak to of how they can get into this industry. But what that meant at the same time was, where do I leave space for my personal life? Where is that time with my husband? Or where is that time where, I go and hang out with my brother and sister? And where's all that time gone? And that's where self-mastery really, really matters to me, that I am constantly aware of what I need for the future so that I can kind of judge it beforehand and take the necessary action beforehand, but also at the same time match it to my personal life. How do I balance these two? Because it's really important, especially like given the current competition. It's so crazy out there. You never know when there's going to be someone else who's going to be so better than you, and like you were just not prepared for it, right? So to me, it's something you need to be aware of every day, every moment, just so that you can plan your life in a more doable manner, so that you're not burning yourself out just to keep up with the steam and be ahead of the game, but you're aware that your family is important to you, or you have these other passions that you want to do, and you plan it out in a very healthy manner as such.
Thanks so much. And I think a lot of what, Jen, Katie, and Pooja, a lot of what you said, it definitely, I feel like it kind of swings back to our mental health as well, because part of it is it's absolutely mental health is an element to it. So Lindsay, I just wanted to kind of taking mental health into account. I am definitely guilty of this. Of not putting myself in the same level and care or attention as I would with kind of the other passions, my family or that I have. It might be natural. I don't know. Maybe it isn't. But why is it important to start putting ourselves at the same level, or make sure that we have the same level of care and give ourselves the same level of attention as we would to other things that we're equally passionate and love? And the importance of slowing down. We've talked about, because we're in that world, whether it's personality driven or whether, like as Pooja's like balancing so many things, the importance of slowing down at the same time to do some self-reflection. What is the importance of doing that for our mental health, but also the equal importance of ensuring that we shift our priorities as well, so that we're also at the top.
Okay, so just to summarize the 2 points you said, so it's like, okay, what's the importance of putting ourselves first and also slowing down? And what I promise I'm not just going to say to you guys is the metaphor about the oxygen mask, because we know we're like, yes, I know, I get it, we're good. And then you kind of forget about it, right? But it's so true. I mean, you can choose to learn the hard way and see what happens, see how many, episodes of depression you can rack up, see how many burnouts you can go through. And I've been there, right? And I've been there even through COVID. When COVID started, I was like, I'm going to be one of those people, and I'm going to use all this extra free time that I have, which I didn't, because I'm still working full time, yet I somehow thought that because I couldn't go to restaurants for dinner that I had all this extra free time. And so I was like, I'm going to, start a new business, and maybe I'm going to see clients in private practice again. And I'm also going to train clinicians, and maybe I want to get into EAP trainings. But then you just get ahead of yourself, right? And if you don't put in the time now, you're never going to make it to the finish lines that you want to get to, right? And insert whatever other cheesy metaphor you could possibly come up with yourself there. But it's like, you have to pace yourself, right? You have to take the time to slow down. And something that I did is so I work with clients. We do a lot of exposure work to expose them to their biggest fears. And so I did that for myself for the month of May. So my birthday was in May. So I was like, my birthday gift to myself this year is that I'm going to force myself to slow down. And that's going to be my self-exposure, right? Like in terms of therapy work, not other things. And just really focus on like, what does that experience feel like? Yes, in the beginning, it's super uncomfortable because we are taught as, young women in this culture from a very young age that you're a woman, you have to catch up, equality, that means you need to push yourself, that means you need to do better and show, put yourself at a higher standard to men so that men will take you seriously. And, of course, that's just part of my lived experience, but I think it's really important to recognize that because it leaves us with this core belief. So like this message or something that we believe, really at the foundation of who we are, that we need to be doing more. Right. And so with that, we really need to keep in consideration that our mental health and physical health need to come first, or else we're not going to be here, right? Or else we're not going to be able to function. We're not going to be able to achieve our goals, take care of our family, be there for others, and be there for ourselves first and foremost. So I'd like to put a challenge out to everyone today to maybe over this weekend, whatever you had planned that's work related, that isn't on a deadline for Monday, whatever you had, if you have your schedule jam-packed to take care of everyone else, I want you to go ahead. I give you permission to cancel those plans for both days as your own exposure practice and see what happens, right? See what it's like to just open up the time for yourselves to just be. You're probably going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay, but that will go away with time, right? And you just be like, okay, wait, oh my God, I have 4 hours of free time. Like, what can I do with this time? What do I want to do? Yes, okay, I want to look up that hip hop video class that I've been getting ads for like 2 months now and actually take the time to do it, right? That's something that's been coming up in my email, but whatever it might be for you, right? It's just like, see what happens. You might be surprised. Yeah.
I'm going to quickly add to what Lindsay said. So you'll be surprised. This is something me and my husband were talking about just today. That, oh my God, we need to take our laptops, our mobiles, and everything that's technology related, and that can cause any distraction, and just lock it up into the cupboard for the whole weekend and just breathe. I mean, go for a walk, breathe that fresh air. Well, there are lesser cars, so the air is definitely cleaner. And live in that moment. You're not going to get that opportunity every day because, to be honest, our life is run. So that moment you get, seize a moment every weekend. What Lindsay said is very true. Seize a moment, even if it is like one day out of the week, where you just lock everything away and just be with the people you love and go for a stroll or just sleep in the whole day. I mean, that.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's like no one's going to give that to you. You're not going to have the self-care fairy come down and rip your phone out of your hands, right? Like you have to, that's where this whole idea of discipline and commitment really comes into play for me with self-mastery, is that you have to be the one to start. You have to rip off that Band-Aid, no matter how uncomfortable it feels and how unnatural and forced it feels. Like, yes, it's going to feel like that in the beginning, but with practice, it will get easier. Where you actually can go outside and, after work yesterday, I went outside and sat down and just sat in the sun for half an hour, and I didn't think twice. It's not, oh, I have to go walk the dog right now, or oh, I have to start dinner right now. It's like, no, like that can wait. This is for me.
It's
I'm gonna
really
quickly,
oh,
Samia,
sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Manjeet.
just quickly add something that if you feel guilty about like ripping off all of that, like, you know, technology away from you, there's actually a terrific study by Stanford that was actually done that instead of even large vacations that we all like crave often, and especially in a time of Zoom when we're doing everything electronically, that if you can like every 90 days actually go for, I might get my numbers wrong, 4 days without any technology in your life, like completely unplugged, you are actually more productive, you're actually more creative, you're actually more innovative. So, I mean, it's really, you know, so there's actually a reason. It's actually going to make you more productive and better at doing by actually being out in nature and not being on technology. 4 days every 90 days.
I'm going to master self-care.
All right, I'm writing that down. Thanks, Manjeet. It's really interesting that you bring, Pooja and Lindsay and even Manjeet. Like, I feel like for me, I've learned a lot from my now 2-year-old, who is incredibly, she's fierce and curious and just fearless, and just she's constantly asking questions, and she's essentially a nature kid, which is awesome. And she has no hesitation, no shame whatsoever. And it's interesting because I think, Pooja, you brought up this point before, is that the fear of the unknown, the fear of the I don't know kind of element. And there's no shame. There's no shame for her, but I feel like for us sometimes, whether it's work related or life related, the I don't know sometimes petrifies some of us. I'll speak for myself. I've definitely been through this. And oftentimes we're like, okay, oh my God, I don't know, but is there going to be judgment on this other person? That what am I going to think about myself? And it comes with fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of not knowing. And I think that part of it is, I think, equally important with self-awareness and self-mastery when we're trying to make progress and we're still like, I don't know where this journey is taking me. There's a fear, an element of fear in it. So how can we let go of that? Or how do we accept that sometimes even when you do kind of put in the effort, it's also not going to be instantaneous, that you're going to know exactly who you're supposed to be, where you're supposed to go. So I want to kind of get this kind of from you, Lindsay, Pooja, Jen, and Manjeet. I mean, how do we kind of navigate this?
I think, you know what, Soumya, it's like I said, right? I have always been so afraid of speaking where there's a mass crowd, because I'm like, what if I say something stupid, or what if I don't sound smart enough? I mean, I'm the director of a company, and if I don't know what the latest thing is in marketing, that's going to be so embarrassing. And you know, those thoughts are so demeaning, and they are self-created. That's the one thing we need to acknowledge at the get-go. Most of our fears are self-created. Now, I'm not talking about medical fears. I'm talking about generic day-to-day fears. You created themselves. So for instance, I mean, when you're at work, right, we have this tendency to say yes to anything that our superior gives us, no matter how much work is already on our plate. And what is the core fear in that? One, you're afraid you're going to lose your job. Or two, you're afraid the person's going to get angry with you or think that you're not good enough. Well, ask yourself this. If you lose that job, are you not going to get a job anywhere else? If that person doesn't think you're good enough, well, if you already have 100 things on your plate and you're feeling so exhausted and that person has still not realized your value, like your superior hasn't seen it, they're never going to see it. That's period. So you need to be aware that that's not the place for you in that. It's like the universe telling you, get out of here. You know, so most of the times it is acknowledge the fact that your fears aren't really something to be afraid of. You need to conquer them. I know that's a very cliche thing to say, but it's true, because like I said, this self-created. And if you're someone who's like me, who needs to control every element of your life, have a plan B. The plan B doesn't need to be detailed. It's just that you know that there are opportunities out there. So if you're afraid of losing your job, then keep an eye constantly open for a job hunt. Like I always tell this to newcomers, right? Sometimes a good practice is that even if you're in a job, after you finish, say, a year or 6 months or something, start going for interviews. Even if you are not looking to take the job, keep that practice going. You'll overcome that fear and you won't be afraid to do what you want to do in your job and stand up for yourself and conquer that element, if that is your fear. The same thing can happen in every other space of your life, right? It's just that part that your fear is self-created. It's just sounds really simple. I know it's super challenging because I'm still so terrified. Like, you have no idea how nervous I was before this call. But it's something that you just kind of have to acknowledge and face it.
Yeah, and to build on that, this is an area that I spend a lot of time with my clients, right? So the big thing with fear is that it's an emotion, right? It's the primary fear that's hiding under anxiety. And fear, it's automatic, right? It's not something that we can control. We cannot change how it shows up, when it shows up, the sensations that come up in our body, right? And the biggest way to practice acceptance of that fear is to be afraid and to face your fear anyways, just as what Pooja was saying, like to go ahead and do it anyways, right? The biggest way to change the fear and to see that fear go down over time is through repeated practice by doing exactly it is what you're scared of most, right? Within the realm of, it's not actually going to physically harm you, right? Because the majority of our fears are irrational, right? And so with that is just taking the action to just try it out anyways and see what happens. Because fear also makes us doubt ourselves and our abilities. But when we actually do the opposite of like avoiding it or procrastinating, when we actually move towards it, we're able to prove to ourselves that, oh yeah, no, screw this fear. Like, I was right. I know how to do this. And oh yeah, I actually do have these skills, right? And that's how we start to build that trust and confidence in ourselves to the next level.
Yeah. Do we have time? Can I add a little bit, Samia?
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah, we all have fears, right? And they can be irrational, they can be rational. And we often can blame ourselves, right? And we put a lot of shame in that, like, why didn't I just do it, etc. So, just from my own personal experience and some of the work that I do a lot with clients, I mean, it's very, it's Jungian based, but the fact is that we all have a big sack behind us, like Santa Claus, but it's a dark sack. It is full of all of the shit that we were told, excuse the word, but all the shit that we were told was not good, right? And we were told by parents, we were told by society, we were told by school, like whether it's speaking up, whether it's being a confident woman, whether it's talking about our feelings, whatever it could be, right? So, or anger, anger is one of those, fear is another one, that it's actually a bad thing or whatever have you. So when we're ashamed about all of these things that we've actually been taught, right? I say taught because we're not born with them. Right? Like you talked about your child, Samia. Well, your child is not like she, you're obviously parenting extremely well because she's out there just being rambunctious and doing all of this stuff because she has had not these crazy parameters put on her. So I guess what I'm saying is that these fears are often so learned, but they become on autopilot, right? Like they're on autopilot. So what happens is that we need to break them open. Like, and that's, and it's hard work. It's not always something you can do by yourself. You might need a coach, you might need a therapist. I don't know what it is, right? Or you need a support group at least who understands it. But the reality is that we're not really fully whole and fully in self-mastery or even getting closer to it until we can embrace what's in our shadow. Right? Because that's what actually makes us whole. And I mean, like for me, like I'm embracing the introvert in me because as from a personal perspective, I've always been an extrovert. I've always had more energy than a room full of people, even half my age. And the thing is, so that became my story. And yet, like there was these things, there's an introvert in me that was almost like afraid to come out because it was like, who am I if I'm not the extrovert Manjeet, right? I mean, that's a very simple example. Or confidence, right? Why do overconfident people full of ego really bothered me? And they really bothered me because it was me then learning that it's actually bothering me because there's a little deep part of me that just wants to be that uber confident person that they are. Maybe not like them, but actually it's, a little scared to come out. So anyways, yeah, so our fears can be like, we can blame ourselves. So I guess what I'm saying is be gentle with yourself. Your fears, may not be irrational. They're so learned, but they've become on autopilot. They're unconscious. So now it's time to gently bring them out. They're calling. Your fears are gnawing at you on the inside to say, I want to come out and play. So let me play.
Well said, Manjeet. Jen, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think my thought is like completely opposite because I think sometimes we just get maybe over absorbed in ourself. Like, I feel like it can feel so like all about self when you're so concerned about what other people are thinking or doing. Or so I don't know, the thread that I wanted to include was like, if we use humility, then we're not worried as much, I don't know, about what everybody else is thinking, kind of thing. So that's just where my head was going on that topic. But because but that again, it didn't, and I've said this many times to a lot of young Indigenous women that I mentor, that didn't come for me until like after 40. And I'm being really honest. I used to worry all the time what people thought, and now I don't care. And that's really freeing. But not that I don't care where it's, I don't care about them. I don't care about their feelings. It's just, I don't worry about what they think about me or what other people are doing. And there is so much freedom in that. But it's also, when we talk about confidence and women walking into rooms, it's a fine line, because as another woman, or even when a man behaves that way, sometimes it feels really icky, and you don't want to be that person who has that massive ego, because it's not appealing to me anyway. So I think it's just like to master that balance of having a great amount of humility as well as confidence is like that. The balance is the challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. Like, a lot of what you said really resonated with kind of what I may be currently going through, what I've gone through, my previous experiences. And yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, we are great at and good at many things. We do them really well. But it's interesting because I'm thinking back to my days earlier in my career, where I was one of those people that would kind of compare my skill sets. I would think, okay, well, you know what, my colleague, like, he's getting all these projects, so maybe it's because I don't have the skill set, so maybe I need to be an expert at this. But I never really took the time to think about the skill things that I'm kind of naturally good at doing. And then for some reason, I don't know why, but I didn't value them as much, because it wasn't like a tangible certificate or like something saying that I'm an expert at this or whatever. And it felt as though it wasn't a real effort because I was so naturally good at it, but I, at the same time, didn't value that as an asset. So I guess, and with that being said, I wasn't necessarily being who I needed to be and who I truly am. So why is it that we feel as though we need to be experts at so many things, but we don't necessarily, it's probably even coming back to self-reflection, we don't take the time to really think about our natural skill sets as being one of them?
Sonia, I'm going to just, just something came to me, so that's why I'm answering quickly.
Yeah.
I've been a lot of my life in a very, very similar situation, right? And it's interesting because what I'm going to call them are like sort of significant, what's the word? Like significant attributes, let's say. I mean, you can do all kinds of tests that can help you figure what they are. And I never valued mine because they came so naturally to me. They weren't hard to get to. And that's, again, there's science behind this, but this idea that we become habituated to who we are, right? Different from the homeostasis. So because we're so used to, like, let's say if you're a curious soul, a lifelong learner, are creative or whatever, and you've always been that way, you're kind of just habituated to it. And because it doesn't seem difficult, you stop valuing it. You know, I mean, and it took me a long time. It didn't take me till my late 40s to actually understand that my natural skill sets were actually beautiful gifts, and that they weren't natural for everybody else, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that, to put it quickly, is if you can figure out what your sort of significant attributes are, like your top 5 or 6 or whatever have you, I think a really good way of sort of unhabituating yourself, if any of you are finding that way, is to start using them in a different dimension of your life than what you usually do. So if you're a creative because you're a graphic designer, how can you be creative and build a practice of it? Maybe in cooking, in gardening, in pottery class. I don't know. It's going to be different for everybody else, right? And for each person. Or if you're a lifelong learner and you've been learning in a certain stream, how do you apply that to something? Because you need a little bit of a challenge in what your even significant attributes are to sort of then, it's sort of like that beautiful virtuous circle, because now all of a sudden you'll appreciate them because you were challenged a little bit, but yet it was easy for you. And then you're, sort of confidence, but yet maybe humility at the same time grows. I mean, I agree with you, Jen. Confidence without humility is like, well, and then that brings you the beauty of I'm going to link it back to your child again. There's an awe-like wonder in being challenged, but being challenged with your significant attributes is so much more affirmative and positive than being challenged in situations that feel so hard, because then we give up easier. So that's why on our road to self-mastery, I always try to work with clients to actually sort of go, what's safe scaffolding right now for you to experiment in? Because if we reach too far, we give up faster. I know that sounds crazy, but anyways, so it's like those increment kind of steps that we need to do.
Yeah, I'm gonna build on what Manjeet said. I completely agree with that. Like, and going back to, I mean, each culture and the way you're brought up, or the society you're around. And the simplest example is going back to a kid, right? As a child, when you come back with your grades and all, and if your friend has got a better grade than you're immediately going to be cornered on that, no matter how much you've scored, saying that, why didn't you get as much as that friend of yours did? Did you not study harder? You all were doing the same things. How come, your friend did better? It ends up being a childhood training session we go through, where rather than being taught to be proud of who you are as an individual, even if it is something as basic as, I want to be a painter. I suck at it, but that's what I want to do. Rather than being nurtured for that, you're going to be nurtured for something that the society deems as what is the right thing, or what is the most intelligent thing to be, right? It's our duty to acknowledge the fact that no, that's not what it is. You're going to succeed if you are good at what you feel passionate about. It's like being in a job you don't love, you're never going to succeed in it. You're just going to be a robot going to work, coming back home and unhappy, right? So and this is one of the most common discussions my husband and I have, that if we ever decide to have a kid, and when we have a kid, we're going to we need to create that environment where he or she is allowed to be who he or she wants, be it gender-based, be it career-wise, be it as a person, as long as the basic human values are in that person. Be good to others, don't hurt anyone, be a good person. That's it. Then you have to let each individual create their own path, right? And that is the crucial element of this.
As a mom of four, I'm just going to tell you, it can be a great intention, but I've really screwed up a lot of times. So forgive yourself if you screw up.
Thank you for that.
Every mother,
I'm pretty sure that was important.
No such thing as perfection.
I just want to add a point of kind of flipping the question a little bit. So what has really been beneficial to me is understanding what I'm not good at. And not only what I'm not good at, but how I might respond to situations based on, my personality or who I kind of am as a person. And why that's been important to me is because, it's actually, again, I'll go back, put weight in what you want, but my Myers-Briggs is an INTJ, which I found the most value out of actually how I will respond to criticism, and how I will respond to situations, and kind of my weaknesses, I guess I'll call it. And the reason for that is because I read those weaknesses and I was like, yep. But what that did for me is it actually gave me almost the permission to not internalize them. And so it gave me this permission to say, oh yeah, I know I respond to situations like this. I feel really terrible that I do that. But now that I have this awareness that that is how I will show up, I can stop myself. And if unfortunately I do show up in this way, I can forgive myself and I can acknowledge why this has happened. And And it honestly was just this very freeing thing. And you know, that ties into this self-mastery and to self-awareness is, you know, understanding what you're good at is amazing and what those skills are naturally, but also understanding how you're kind of going to naturally react to situations I found to be very valuable. And it also allows you to decide, or not to decide, but to recognize how you might improve those situations as well and improve those parts of you. So that's something I've been really working on over the past year. And like I said, it really has helped me let go of the internalizing of those weaknesses and those behaviors.
Thanks, Katie. That was actually really helpful. Well, I've certainly, until kind of 5 years ago, would kind of just say, no, I'm not, you know, that's not who I am. But then you're absolutely right. I mean, maybe it is who I am, but I think it's absolutely okay to be that type of person. It is what it is. And, you know, you need to embrace both sides. You can't just embrace, you know, the positives. You should also embrace your weaknesses as well. So just kind of shifting gears a little bit, and I wanted to get Jen, kind of your perspective on this as being an entrepreneur. A lot of times, I think it's equally important for us to do some reflection for ourselves, but I do think if we're looking to create positive change in the world and we're looking to bring change in our community, you're absolutely right, is to create change within ourselves. And in order to lead others, we must first learn to learn to lead ourselves as individuals and learn how we work and who we are as individuals. So taking from like an entrepreneurial lens, why is it important for entrepreneurs or those who are in high impact roles or those who are just naturally leaders to do continual reflection and refinement and not just kind of the one-offs? Why? Yeah.
I think I forgot I was an entrepreneur while talking here this yeah. Yeah, I mean, just as much as like when you think about yourself, when you're building a business or a company, it has to have that solid set of values and principles that the company stands for. So when things are happening, whether it be something like COVID or Black Lives Matter, you know, as a company already, your principles and value system, you know, your core values as a business, and you can make decisions based on those. And it helps when there's big situations happening globally. And then it's an important way to build from the beginning that your team can follow and see, here's the map, here's the guidelines, here's how we operate at Cheekbone Beauty. So for anyone who is another entrepreneur building a business, foundations and built on solid principles, I think is really, really important. And then that is to get all boring and stuff, but built in your manuals, your systems and processes from the beginning. And I always did that with our company when it was just me, you know, building those processes and systems into everything, whether it be the marketing that we do or inventory systems or the, you know, welcome handbook to the company. I started that really early on. And it really helps you refine your business as you're building it as well, and each aspect of your business. So it's super, super important. And that's, then once you start hiring, there's no questions, they're all answered. But and then also really reframing your own mindset, realizing of course there's going to be more questions, but at least you have the foundation of a solid set of values and principles that you run your business by first.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks so much.
Samia, could I just add, as someone who's also kind of never worked for anybody except my whole
For
life,
yourself?
except when I was a hostess at McDonald's. That's how old I am. When McDonald's had hostesses.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I used to pour coffee for all the old people, that's not nice, when a lot of people came in the mornings and wanted coffee, and I poured coffee for them. But anyways, Jen, I think I can't agree with you more. When I used to own my retail and skincare company, I mean, I literally, we came up with like a code of conduct, literally. And it was a code of conduct so that, and this was back in the 90s, but it was just that concept of, the staff actually created it. And it was all around how we wanted to show up as whole human beings at work. Right? Because I think the only thing I would add here is that we often think about work as these organizations that are hugely mechanized. And that's, I mean, a little pet peeve for me. I'm trying to help organizations become and expand more human, because we literally need organizations to be living organisms that play with what people value and how people's values fit into the corporate values, so that, like our communities, the ecosystem, and people are all thriving, not just the bottom line, right? So that becomes really critical. So that's why it's self-mastery, whether it's personal and you help your staff actually do it, then you actually are becoming sort of master at your business as well. I mean, that's a simple way of saying it, but it's just so profound. And I think it's what's going to change the world. I really, really do. Businesses have to become more human.
And it's, for us, it was really understanding. We knew we wanted to hire a lot of Indigenous youth to eventually come work for us. And we really had to face the facts that our communities are healing from generational trauma that so many of us still face. And many may come to us without a home that had principles and values. So we have a big role to fill, that we wanted to be here as a teacher, a leader for these kids as well.
That's beautiful.
Yes, I'm a big fan of Jen. Sorry, lastly, I want to I know that we're over time. Sorry. This has just been so exciting. I want to Lindsay, coming from your perspective, where do we start? I mean, what are some of the techniques that we can put into practice as step one, or even step two? Actually, no, step one. Yeah, what is the first step to put into practice? As you mentioned, we need to put our words into action. So after we have that conversation with ourselves, or what is even the first step to having that conversation with ourselves, where do we begin?
I think everyone's brought up in so many different ways so far. So I'll just summarize what we've been talking about. For me, really the first step in what I do with working with clients is figure out, what are your values, right? So what are the things that excite you and make you want to get out of bed in the morning, whether that's starting a business, whether that's helping others, working with animals, domestic duties, like whatever it is taking the time to figure out, okay, if I had only, so many hours in a day, if I had to fill 6 hours with only the things that matter, and it's kind of like the question of like, if I can only have 3 things on an island, like what would I take? So it's kind of like that before your life, right? So like, what are those things that are truly, truly important to you? What are those, maybe let's say top 5, right? It could be 5 or 6, but 5 is just like a general benchmark. So going through, okay, what are my values? And then looking at doing a kind of an inventory of your life, whether that's reviewing your Google Calendar, looking at your agenda, reading through your journal, reviewing your LinkedIn page, scrolling your Facebook. It's like, how do I kind of step back from my experience and get a macro level view of what's going on in my life right now, right? So look at, okay, how am I spending my time? Am I spending 6 hours on Facebook a day? Am I working till 2 o'clock in the morning? Am I only spending like an hour with my family a day, right? Really get an assessment, kind of do an inventory of how you're spending your time, and then look at, okay, well, does this match up with my values? What's missing, right? And start to get a sense of that ideal versus reality. And you can look at that as a starting point to then put together a plan of, how can I make shifts in my life right now, whether that's prioritizing health or family or scaling back on the number of hours of work. How can I start to brainstorm some ideas to better align the ideal with that reality? Yeah. So that's like my super condensed version of just a part of the work that I do with clients. But I would say that that's a good starting point. Yeah.
Lindsay, do you suggest that, I remember back in, I don't know how far back it goes, those dream boards,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I remember even 5 years ago, I would just write everything on my whiteboard.
Yeah.
And then anything that came to mind as far as values, regardless of how small it was.
Yeah.
But do you feel that that would kind of even be a first step to potentially help identify what we truly value, but also identify what we're going to be prioritizing? Because as I think you mentioned earlier, it's great that we have so many things going, but we don't want to do 20% of everything or 10% of everything, and we may not necessarily reach the finish line. So what are your recommendations for that?
Yeah, that's tricky, I think. So yeah, it's definitely working with like a dream board or a vision board, especially if you're a very visual learner or a visual thinker. Good luck finding magazines to cut out and paste, so you can use Pinterest. I've done those before, right? And even in some of the business training I was doing, it's like, start with a vision board. What's your plan? Like, where do you want to be in 5 years? What do you want your life to look like in 10 years? Those can be some kind of starter questions. And then you can just scrape Pinterest for different pictures to create a vision board for yourself. And then from there, the next place I would look at is setting SMART goals, right? So SMART goals are goals that are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely. Google that to really get a full flush out of it. But that's a really good place to start. If you find that you're struggling, do not hesitate to reach out to a coach or a psychotherapist, someone that can help you work through that. Because oftentimes we get so jumbled and caught up in our anxieties and our fears and our hopes and dreams, but we're also perfectionists and we have these really high standards, but mom wants me to do this, and husband wants me or wife wants me to do that, right? So it's like, okay, how do we just kind of organize this all? And having someone who's not a part of your life or connected in any way is a really good step to be able to start organizing, and then in building up a plan for that behavioral change over time.
Thank you. This has been awesome. I feel like this conversation